They say the North Woods remember everything. The trees whisper in the wind, and the snow carries secrets older than names. When I was a boy, my grandmother used to light a cedar fire each winter night and tell us stories, not the kind you'd find in books. These were older, passed down like hand-knit scarves and tobacco pouches, worn smooth with time and stitched together with belief. She told us of the Wendigo. It waits when the cold gets sharp and deep, she'd say, eyes squinting toward the window, as if watching for a shadow behind the snow. It used to be human long ago, but its heart turned to ice the day it gave in to hunger, not just for food, but for more. More than it needed, more than it deserved. She said it roamed the northern forests long after the stars were born, a spirit of endless craving, tall as the pines, with skin stretched thin like wind-worn leather. Its voice was a mix of wind and weeping, and if you heard it call your name, it meant it was already too late. Back then, I thought she told those stories just to keep us close to the hearth, to make sure we didn't wander off into the woods after dark or chase rabbits past the edge of the trail. But I know now, she wasn't telling us stories. She was giving us warnings. Warnings I didn't fully understand until the winter my uncle went missing. That was the year the snow came early and stayed longer than it should have. The trees stood too still, and the silence between the wind howls lasted just a little too long. That was the year I followed the tracks into the woods, and that was the year I learned the truth. Some stories aren't just stories. Their survival. It was early December when I returned to Barrows Hollow. The town wasn't on most maps. Tucked into the edge of the northern forest, it sat like a forgotten postcard, its rooftops buried in snow and smoke rising slow from chimneys like breath from sleeping giants. There were only two ways in, the old forest road and the rail line that hadn't run in 20 years. My uncle, Thomas Gray, had lived there all his life, a trapper, woodsman, and quiet sort of man. He never married, never left. Folks in the village said he belonged to the land, and truthfully, the land seemed to agree. He knew every ridge, every frozen creek, every trail that wound through the whispering woods. So when the village radio crackled with the news that Thomas hadn't returned after a snowstorm, people knew something was wrong. He didn't make mistakes out there. Not him. I arrived 2 days after the search party came back empty-handed. They'd found his snowshoe prints heading north into the deeper forest, and then nothing, as if the trees had swallowed him whole. The moment I stepped off the bus, I felt it. Stillness. Not just the usual quiet you expect in a northern town, but something heavier, the kind that sinks into your bones. Eyes watched from behind frosted windows. Doors opened only halfway. When I asked about my uncle, the answers were short and tight. Storm got him, one man mumbled. He knew the risks, said another. He wouldn't have gone that far without a reason, I said. The man just looked at me. Maybe something called him. That night, I stayed in my uncle's cabin, a low timber building at the edge of the trees. His gear was still packed, a kettle still on the stove. The firewood pile sat untouched, though the cold inside had crept into every corner like a silent guest. I found his journal in a drawer beside the bed. The last page was dated 3 days before he vanished. It read, "Something is moving beyond the ridge. No tracks, no sound, just watching." I saw a shape between the trees tonight, thin, too tall. Thought it was a shadow, but the snow beneath it didn't crunch. I remember what Ma used to say, "Don't look into the dark too long. The dark looks back." I stared at that page for a long time, feeling the cold settle deeper into my chest. I wanted to believe it was just the storm or isolation playing tricks on his mind, but then I heard it, a low, distant howl, long and hollow, like wind passing through a broken flute. I stepped out onto the porch and looked into the trees. There was nothing, only snow and silence, and a single crow, black as midnight, perched on a bare branch, staring straight at me. The next morning the world was buried beneath a new layer of snow, soft and soundless, the kind that muffles even your own breath. I packed a satchel with some food, a compass, my uncle's journal, and a faded trail map he'd kept rolled in a glass jar above the fireplace. I wasn't planning to go far, just enough to see what he might have been tracking. Maybe find a sign, a trail, anything. The villagers said nothing as I left. A few watched from windows. One old woman by the post office crossed herself. I took the northern path, the same direction his tracks had led before they vanished. It wound between pine stands and frozen streams, every inch of it blanketed in silence. The deeper I went, the less the world felt like mine. Trees stood too still, shadows stretched too long, and once I heard something far off, a rustle that wasn't the wind. I stopped for a moment and glanced at the map. My uncle had penciled in an X near a place called Whistler's Notch. Not on any official chart, but he had drawn it like it mattered. I pressed on, letting the map guide me past ridge lines and frost-bitten birch. By noon, I reached the notch. It wasn't much, just a narrow clearing between two ancient rocks, like crooked teeth jutting from the ground. But the air there was different, heavier, still, like the land itself was holding its breath. And then I saw the first sign. A tree, maybe 40 feet tall, stripped clean of bark from the base to its top. The wood beneath was clawed, 5 long grooves running up and around like something massive had spiraled up the trunk. No animal does that, no storm either. I took a step closer and saw the symbol carved into the tree next to it. A circle with a slashed-out eye in the center, rough, hurried, like someone had done it with a shaking hand. It matched a doodle I'd seen in the corner of my uncle's journal. It watches without eyes, the note read. Mark the trees to keep it confused. The sun was low when I heard it again. That same distant howl, long, mournful, but this time it wasn't far off. It echoed between the rocks behind me, bending through the trees like smoke. I froze, not because of the sound, but because of the silence that followed. Every bird had stopped. No crunch of snow from squirrels, not even wind. I wasn't alone anymore. I turned back the way I came, moving quickly but carefully. That's when I saw the footprints, not mine, bigger, spaced too far apart. They came from the direction of the rocks. But the snow was undisturbed, no dip, no weight, as if the thing that left them wasn't touching the ground. I followed them anyway, slowly, cautiously, until they stopped just ahead, right in front of a ring of trees. Inside that ring, the snow was gone, just black earth, frozen solid, and in the center was a pile of bones, small ones, rabbit, fox, squirrel, all picked clean, arranged in spirals, like some sort of offering or warning. That was when I heard the whisper, not in my ears, in my head, a voice low and familiar, like my uncle's. Turn back. I stumbled away, the cold air suddenly sharp, my breath shallow. The trees around me seemed to lean in, The sky had darkened too fast. I didn't know how long I had been standing there. I turned and ran, slipping and stumbling over the snow-covered ground, not stopping until I saw the first chimney of Barrow's hollow smoke curling above the trees. When I returned to the village, no one asked where I'd been, and I didn't tell them what I'd seen. But that night, as I lay in the cabin, I heard the whisper again, softer this time. And it wasn't saying, "Turn back." It was saying my name. The next day, the snow came heavier. Thick flakes fell slow and steady, blanketing the village and the forest beyond like a white curtain. But something in me had already shifted. I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without knowing. Not with that whisper still echoing through my thoughts. I went back to the forest. This time, I didn't follow the map. I followed the crows. There were 3 of them, silent, black shapes hopping along the tree line outside the cabin that morning. I watched them through the frosted window, pecking at the snow, tilting their heads at me like they knew something. When I stepped outside, they lifted off and glided toward the north ridge. So I followed. By midday, the trail markers were gone. No paths, no landmarks, just trees, cold and watching. And I knew then, I wasn't following the crows anymore. I was being led. Eventually, the snow thickened into a full whiteout. The sun vanished behind a ceiling of cloud and every direction looked the same. I was deep enough now that even the air smelled different, colder, older, like stone and ash. That's when I found the cabin. It sat crooked on a hilltop like something forgotten, its roof sagging under the snow, door half off the hinges. I don't know why I went inside. Maybe because of the cold, maybe because something wanted me to. The inside was dark, but not empty. Old hunting gear, dusted in frost, broken traps, a pile of wood in one corner, and beside it, a rusted stove. On the wall hung a photograph, a black and white portrait of 3 men in heavy coats, one of whom looked very much like a younger version of my uncle. But it wasn't the photo that made my breath catch. It was the carving in the wood just beneath it, a circle, a slashed-out eye, the same as before. I lit a small fire in the stove, just enough to thaw the edge from the cold, and sat by it, reading through the last few entries of the journal I'd brought. The dreams are stronger here. One entry read, "It walks at the edges now, tall as the trees, bones under its skin. I see it even when I close my eyes. I've stopped eating. I think it wants me to. It speaks with her voice. My mother's voice. I think it remembers her too." I closed the book and stood. The fire was dying fast, and the light outside had gone from gray to blue. Dusk was settling, and then the door creaked, not from wind, from weight. I turned slowly. There was nothing there, but something had changed. The fire smoke no longer rose. It curled in place, suspended in the air like held breath. Time itself felt bent, slowed. A hush fell across the room, deeper than silence. And then, at the edge of the window, a shadow passed. Not close, not fast, but tall, thin, wrong. I stepped forward and looked out. The trees swayed, though no wind blew, and between them, far off yet unmistakable, stood a figure, twisted limbs, too many joints, antlers like burnt wood. Eyes, no, hollows, stared back at me, and I heard her voice again, not in sound, but in thought. My grandmother's. "Don't look into the dark too long." I blinked, and it was gone. I backed away from the window, heart thudding, breath visible in sharp clouds. I gathered my things and opened the door, ready to leave, only to find the trail outside vanished beneath a fresh wave of snow. No tracks, no crows, nothing but the storm, which had thickened to a swirling white veil. I was trapped. That night I didn't sleep. I barely moved, just sat near the dying fire, the journal on my lap, listening, not to the wind, but to the whispers. It came softly, not just one voice, many, overlapping, echoing. Some called my name, some cried, some laughed, but all of them hungry, and beneath them all, a low, rasping sound, like something breathing just beneath the floorboards, waiting. Sometime in the night, the fire went out. I must have dozed, because when I opened my eyes, the world was cast in pale gray, that strange light that comes just before dawn, where everything looks made of smoke. My breath curled in the still air, and the cabin walls felt tighter, as if the wood itself was drawing inward, holding its own fear. Then I heard the knock, soft, slow, just once. I didn't move, didn't speak. A second knock, closer, this time from behind. I turned sharply, heart hammering, but there was nothing, no door back there, just the wall, lined with frost. And then I saw it. The frost had begun to change. At first it looked like simple patterns from the cold, but the shapes were deliberate. Faces, dozens of them pressing from the inside of the ice. Mouths wide, eyes hollow, like spirits caught mid-scream. I backed away, stumbling into the center of the cabin, when I heard the whisper again, but it wasn't in my mind this time. It was behind me. Elias. I turned. There, just beyond the open cabin door, standing in the snow, was a figure, tall, unmoving, antlers reaching upward like twisted roots. Its form was more shadow than flesh, long limbs, thin torso, ribs visible beneath gray, shivering skin. But where its eyes should have been, there were only deep, dark voids. It didn't step forward, it glided. Snow didn't crunch beneath it, trees didn't sway. Even the cold seemed to hold its breath. And then it spoke again, but not in its own voice. Elias, it's me. You found me. My uncle's voice, broken, familiar, sad. I didn't want to go, but the hunger, it doesn't stop. It never stops. I froze. It was impossible, a trick of the forest, a mimic. Some part of me knew that, but the voice was so right, so full of pain, of memory. You remember that summer, don't you? It said, stepping closer, still hovering. When we built the canoe together. You were just a boy. It was true. That summer. That canoe. I hadn't thought of it in years. I shook my head. You're not him. The thing tilted its head. Aren't I? It raised one hand, not quite human, its fingers ending in blackened claws like sharpened branches. But in its palm was something small, familiar. A pendant, wood-carved, in the shape of a bear. My uncle had given it to me when I was 8. I'd lost it the year after. You dropped it in the river, the thing said, voice quieter now. I kept it. I felt my knees weaken. My breath slowed. Some small, cold part of me whispered, it could be true. Maybe he's still in there. Maybe he just wants help. But then I remembered my grandmother's warning. The Wendigo is clever. It remembers who you were. It speaks with the voices of the ones you miss most, because that's how it gets in. The creature stepped over the threshold, and I finally saw its mouth. It hadn't opened yet. It didn't need to, but now it did. Its jaw cracked, wider than any humans should, stretching like splintered bark, and from within came a chorus of voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, all pleading, all calling, and somewhere in the middle, my own, calling for help. That was when I ran, out the door, into the snow. I didn't stop to think, didn't look back. The storm had lifted just enough to see the trees, tall and silent. And there, perched on a branch above, the crow, the same one. It stared at me, then flew north. I followed, through frost-bitten brush, past frozen creeks and low valleys until I crested a ridge and saw it. The boundary of the forest, faint but real. The edge of where the trees began to thin. I ran until I collapsed. When I looked back, nothing followed. But in the far distance, I saw the dark figure again, barely visible, watching from the trees, still, silent, waiting. I don't remember how long I lay in the snow. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. But when I opened my eyes, the storm had passed, and the world around me had softened into that strange winter hush, the kind that comes only after something ancient has gone still. The forest behind me no longer whispered, the air no longer held breath. It was just quiet, deep, blanketing quiet. I stood slowly, my legs numb, body shaking with cold, and followed the ridge down toward the village. My boots crunched the snow again, a sound I hadn't realized I missed. When I reached the edge of Barrow's Hollow, no one came out to greet me, but I saw eyes in the windows, curious, cautious, knowing. I didn't speak much after that, not at first. People assumed I'd gotten lost in the woods, disoriented, maybe frostbitten, and that was fine by me. But I knew the truth. So did they. I spent one more night in my uncle's cabin. The crow came back that evening, perching on the chimney, watching me from above. I left the door open for a moment, just long enough to listen to the wind. No whispers, only the creak of trees and the long sigh of snow melting on the stove. In the morning, I packed my things and walked to the bus stop. Before I left, I took one last walk to the tree line, the place where the forest began. That's when I saw it, a statue, crude, twisted, made of wood, ice, and bones, shaped like a man but wrong, hollow eyes, open mouth, and in its hand, the bare pendant, frozen inside a piece of ice like something locked in time. I didn't touch it, I just nodded. "I'm sorry," I whispered, whether to the statue or to my uncle or to whatever still lingered inside that forest. I'm not sure. And then I left. It's been years now. I don't go north anymore. I don't camp in the woods or wander off trails. But I do still tell the story, the one my grandmother once told me, and the one I now carry for myself. I tell it to those who listen, to children when they ask why the forest is off limits, to travelers who think the old stories are just folklore, and to anyone who hears a voice in the wind calling their name. Because here's what I've learned. The Wendigo doesn't always come with claws and teeth. Sometimes it comes with a familiar voice, a memory, a promise, a hunger that feels like home, but it's not, and it never was. So if you ever find yourself deep in the winter woods, and the trees go silent, and the wind seems to whisper like someone you once loved, don't listen, don't turn. And for the love of all that still remembers the old ways, never follow the crows.